Hi everyone, Mike again with MEG Motors. Today we're going to be looking at this Poulan Pro 200 mile an hour blower. It was given to me by a friend of mine in exchange for working on some other stuff for him, so don't really know much about it except that it doesn't run. Like we always do when we start these videos, we're going to run a simple start on spray test. We need three things to make this thing run. We need spark at the right time, we need compression, and we need fuel in approximately the right ratio. I've done a quick look over this one and I see that the fuel lines they're actually broken. So we know we have fuel troubles, but before we go through the trouble of rebuilding the carburetor and replacing fuel lines and doing all that work, we want to make sure we don't have any other issues. So the quick test that I like to do is to open the air cleaner. We're going to do right here. We're going to pull the air filter out and we're going to spray a little carburetor cleaner in the carburetor and see if we can get it to attempt to start. If it attempts to start, we know that we have enough compression to make it run and that the ignition system is working and we have spark at the right time. If it doesn't start on spray, then we may have bigger problems and we may want to investigate that before we put in the time to fix the fuel system. So let's do a quick test. We're going to open the throttle. The choke is wide open, and we're going to spray a little carburetor cleaner in there, and we're going to see if it will start. Well, it's not looking good so far because it sure didn't start. We're going to spray a little more in there. The kill switch is temporary, so we know the kill switch is on. So let's try that again and see if we can get anything out of it. All right. Well, no luck there, so we're gonna have to look a little deeper. So the traditional test to test the ignition system, we're going to pull the spark plug out and see if we can see a spark at the plug. So let's see if we can get that out. All right, so here's our spark plug. It looks wet right now, which typically means that it was getting fuel to it, but it still didn't start. So we're going to do a test. I'm going to move the camera a little closer so hopefully you can see the spark test. Okay, so I'm going to show you two ways we can test for spark. I have a tester like this one. These are relatively inexpensive if you do this work a lot. They're worth having. And so this is going to plug into the spark plug wire. And one of the problems that we have when we're working on these small yard tools is that everything's made out of plastic and it's hard to find a ground. So in order to test for spark, we have to have a connection from the spark plug wire to ground on the engine. And so what I'll do is I'll take a tool like this, could be a screwdriver or anything, and use that to get a ground down into the engine. So hopefully you can see right there is where we're going to be looking for a spark. And when I pull the cord, I don't know if that's going to come out on camera, but it's sparking like it should. So our ignition system seems to be okay. Another way that we can test it, if you don't have a tester like this, of course, is to actually use the spark plug. And we have the same problem when we do that we can't get the spark plug to ground in a way that we can still see the spark plug to see if it's sparking. So I'll again use a tool like a screwdriver or whatever you have handy and use that to supply the ground to the spark plug. As long as you got a good ground, this is safe and you won't get shocked. And so we're going to pull And it's a lot harder to see on the spark plug, but it is sparking. So our ignition system is working. This plug looks a little bit suspect, so I'm actually going to grab another spark plug from my spares, and we're going to try another start test with a different spark plug and see if maybe we can get it to fire off. So stand by. I'm going to reset the camera and go find another spark plug. Okay, so with a different spark plug in it, we're going to try it again, see if it'll start. Cross your fingers. All right, so that's a good sign. That's what we'd hope to see. With that start, we know that we have sparking at the right time. We have enough compression to make it run. So as is the case with most of these, we have carburetor fuel issues. So we're gonna pull the carburetor off of this one. We're gonna go through it. We're gonna put some new fuel lines on it. I've already seen that they're broken off. We'll put some new fuel lines on it and we'll see if we can make this one run again. Okay, so let's get the carburetor off of this one. It's got 2 screws, which is pretty typical. There we go. 2 screws. Normally we'd have a couple fuel lines, but they're broken, of course. Here's our carburetor. This one appears to be a Walbro. Yes, it says Walbro right there. That doesn't come out on the camera a lot of times, but this is a Walbro. And we can see right here on the fuel tank, these are where the fuel lines should be, but you can see that they're both broken off. Should have 2 fuel lines. So we're going to put some new fuel lines on it and go through the carburetor and see if that makes it run. I'm going to get set up to work on the carburetor. I'm going to wash it up a little bit. It's pretty dirty. I'll wash it up and then we'll pull it apart and see what it looks like inside and see if we can make it work again. So I'll be right back. All right, so let's tear into this carburetor and see what we see in here. Like I said, this is a Walbro. It has an integrated primer bulb, which is pretty common. The bulb on this one actually doesn't feel all that bad. A lot of times these bulbs get really hard and brittle and they'll fall apart. This one doesn't feel too bad. We'll put a new one on there anyway, but I've certainly felt a lot worse. So we're gonna pull this apart. So these carburetors are really cool. There's a fuel pump on one side. This side right here is a fuel pump. And so it actually pumps fuel out of the tank and into the carburetor. And then over on this side, we have what's called a metering chamber, which is kind of takes the place of a traditional float bowl. We can't use a float bowl carburetor, obviously, because we have to be able to turn these devices any way that we want, and they still have to run, and a traditional carburetor can't do that. So let's pull this fuel pump side apart and see what we can see in there. Yeah, so here's our primer bulb. And then this is the fuel pump membrane. And this is one of the plastic ones, which are pretty good. They're not affected by the fuel so much, which is a good thing. The important thing we need to look for on the fuel pump diaphragm is this is the actual diaphragm that pulsates back and forth from crankcase pulses and pumps the fuel. And then these 2 pieces here are one-way valves, and they need to be soft and flexible, and they need to be obviously intact. They need to be there. If they're broken off, this won't work. So those little flaps sit on top of the holes in this carburetor. This hole and this hole, I believe, on this one. This hole and this hole, and so they will allow fuel to come out through the hole but not go back down. When fuel tries to go back down, the flap will cover the hole and seal it off. And so using those 2 one-way valves and the membrane, this carburetor can pull fuel out of the tank into this bowl, and it'll come out here and it'll be brought right to this side, right, this part right here where this screen is. And this screen is a passage that goes all the way through the carburetor over to the metering chamber. And so that screen needs to be clean. There's a little bit of dirt on this one, but not too bad. I've seen a lot worse for sure. All right, so we're gonna pull the other side apart. This is the metering chamber side. This is where we typically see all of the trouble. The diaphragm on this side over here needs to be soft and flexible, and they tend to get really hard with the new ethanol fuels. So we're going to pop this apart. Yeah, I can feel this one is hard as a rock. So this diaphragm is the one I'm talking about. Let me see if I can get this off in one piece. I have a feeling this one's probably going to tear. Yeah, it's already tearing. I'll see if I can get it to come off with the gasket maybe. Now, so this diaphragm right here, this is actually two pieces. This is a diaphragm and a gasket, but this diaphragm should be soft and flexible, like almost like tissue paper. And this one is really, really hard. One of the hardest ones I've seen. So there's no way that can work. So what that diaphragm does is this chamber here is normally filled with fuel. This screen passage that we talked about is right underneath on the other side of this needle right here. And so this chamber will be full of fuel, and as the engine runs, it'll pull fuel out of this chamber. And as it does, that diaphragm will slowly move down into the chamber until it hits this lever. And when it pushes that lever down, it'll unseat the needle and allow fuel to flow back into this chamber. And as the fuel flows into this chamber, that diaphragm will rise back up off of the needle and off of the lever, and the needle will seat again to seal off the carburetor. And so if it gets stuck in either position, either down, if it gets stuck down, then the needle will be unseated all the time, and fuel will flow into the chamber under pressure, which will flood the engine. And if it's stuck up, there'll be no fuel in the chamber, and the engine will starve for fuel, and it won't run that way, obviously. And so either one of those situations will keep the engine from running. And so it's important that this diaphragm be soft and flexible. So we're going to have to replace that for sure. And so I'm going to go ahead and take the needle out. So I'm going to hold my finger over this lever because it is spring loaded. We'll take this screw out. And there we go. There's our spring. And that needle actually seems to be stuck. Doesn't want to come out of there. That's pretty rare. I don't think I've seen that very many times. I'm gonna go get a small screwdriver and see if we can pop that out. It's coming out, but not very easily. Yeah, you can kind of see the needles covered with old gas residue. Very sticky. We're going to clean that up and see if we can reuse it. The other piece that's important in here is this piece right here. This is actually a very small one-way valve. There's a piece of rubber, like a rubber gasket on the other side of this opening. And so it will allow fuel to flow down through this opening, but it won't come back up. And that's important for the primer to work, because when we pump the primer, it actually pulls a vacuum in this chamber to pull the diaphragm down to unseat the needle and allow fuel to flow into the carburetor and fill the carburetor. And if this one-way valve is not working correctly, if it's stuck open, for instance, when we pump the primer, we'll just pull air through that hole and it won't prime the carburetor. And obviously if it's stuck closed, when we try to start the engine, fuel can't get down into the in the venturi of the carburetor where it needs to get for the engine to run. So we're going to check all of that and make sure all of that's clean. And then I'm going to look for, look at my spares and see if I have the right diaphragm. I'm sure I do. And we'll get a new primer bulb and we'll see if we can put this carburetor back together. I had the parts I needed in my spares. I got a new primer bulb and I got a new diaphragm right here. It's not exactly the same as this one, but it'll work. It has all the holes in the right places. It's important when you're, if you're doing this from individual parts, not buying a kit, that you look at the size of the button on this diaphragm. Some of these buttons have a raised button like this one, and some of them they're almost flat with the metal disc here, and you want to make sure that you have one that matches the old one. If you mix those up, it won't run right, of course. So yeah, so this is the right one for this one. So we're going to start putting this back together. We're going to start with the fuel pump side. Everything's clean on this one. So we're going to put the bulb on there, put the retainer on there, and then we're going to put this in. It helps to hold the throttle open because the idle speed adjustment screw is right there, and it can be in the way sometimes when you go to put that together. But we'll put that on there, put the two screws in. And once you have the bulb on, you can press it. You should hear air blowing out of this pipe, which I can hear it. So yeah, so that side's back together. I took a little time and I cleaned the needle up, and so now it fits freely like it's supposed to. It falls right out, whereas it was stuck before. So we're going to put the needle back in. I'm going to set the spring back. Ooh. Got to be careful with these springs. They're very small, and if it goes flying and gets lost, you'll probably never find it. I'll put that right there, and then you'll see on this lever, let's see if I can get that to stand still for a minute. See on the lever here that it's got a little raised ring right there. The spring needs to go around that ring when you put this back together. This one's fighting me a little bit. And so when I put these on, I like to put the lever on the spring first and then work it under the needle. Once you get it in place, you can look from the side and make sure that the spring is around that ring like it's supposed to be. And we'll put the retaining screw in. Alright, so that takes care of that part of assembly. We're going to check one more thing. So the height of this lever is important. If it's too high or too low, it'll affect the way the engine runs. It may keep it from running at all. If it's significantly too high, then the lever will always be pushed down some, and it'll have the needle unseated and it'll flood the carburetor. And if it's too low, the diaphragm won't be able to push it far enough to unseat the lever. And so Marlboro makes a tool like this one. I've looked at this one. There's a number on it right here on the side, and this is a WT, and the gauge will also have letters on it. And so we look for the one that has WT, and this is the part that we'll use to check our lever. And so the way you do that is you hold it right there on the gasket surface, with the gasket off, of course. Hold it right there on the gasket surface, and that gauge should just barely touch this needle, which it seems to be adjusted pretty much perfectly. Most of the time, if you're not replacing those parts, it will be okay. But if you get a full kit and you put a needle and a lever in there, you really need to check that setting to make sure that it is right. All right, so we'll continue the assembly. The gasket goes on first, and then this membrane goes on with the button facing down right there, and then our cover goes on, and we'll put our screws back in. These don't need to be terribly tight. Alright, so that gets our carburetor back together. We're going to work on putting some fuel lines on it, and then we'll see if we can make it run. Alright, so let's work on putting some fuel lines on this one. The old ones were really bad. They broke apart as soon as I touched them. This one has two different size fuel lines. That's not always the case, but there's a larger size right here and a smaller size over here. The small one will be the return line, and the big one will be the feed line. And so we have to replace both of those. You can buy the fuel line, Amazon and eBay both sell it, where you can buy about a 2-foot section of each of 4 different sizes of fuel line. Between those 4 sizes, you'll have the right size for just about any piece of equipment you might be working on. I buy the line in bulk because I do probably more of these than most people, but so you can buy it that way if you want to, or you can buy the sample set with the 4 different sizes. And so the first line we're going to put on is this one. This is the small one. This is going to be our return line. And I have a tool. So there's 2 ways to put these fuel lines in. You can simply try to push them down through the hole by hand, and that works some of the time, although that's the harder way to do it. And the other way is to use a special tool to pull the fuel line in through the hole in the tank. And so we're going to do the big one with the tool. I'll show you that in a minute. But this little one, we're just going to try to push it in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to cut an angle on the fuel line, and then I'm going to lubricate it. I have some lubricating compound that I use when I mount tires that helps with fuel line. And then we're going to try to just push this one in. This one only needs to go in the tank a short ways. It doesn't have to go down into the fuel supply. So sometimes it's not too hard to push this one in, this small size one like this. I'm going to try to push it in a little ways. Then you can feel inside the tank. And as long as you've got a little bit of fuel line in there, that's all you really need. Like I said, this one doesn't need to go down into the fuel supply. And so for the other one, we're going to use this tool. And so I've got this tool here that has a hook on one end and a ring on the other end. And so what we'll do is we'll feed this tool in through the hole right here and back out through the opening in the tank like that. Then we'll take our next size fuel line, which is a little larger, and we're going to cut a small angle on that one. And I'm going to use a pick that I have to poke a hole in it, just like that. And then we're going to feed that onto the tool, onto the hook end of the tool. And sometimes this can be the hardest part. There we go. It didn't fight us too hard. And so there we have our fuel line hooked onto the tool. And then just like with the other one, I'm going to put a little lubricant on the fuel line. And we're just going to try to pull it up through the hole. There we go. And once we've got it started, we can grab it with a pair of pliers and pull some more out. All right, that gets the hard part of that out of the way. I've got a new fuel pickup. And so we're going to measure off a little bit of line right here. We're going to cut that off. Just cut it off square. And then we're going to put our new fuel pickup on here. There we go. Then we'll just feed that down inside the tank. Alright. Pretty much takes care of that part. I'll pull a little more fuel line out. Alright, so now I think we're ready to put the carburetor back on, and we'll cut these fuel lines to their final length, and we'll see if we can make this run. Alright, so to put our carburetor back on, we're going to pre-assemble it onto the air filter housing, just sliding it over the screws. We're going to work the throttle lever into place, the throttle linkage into place, then we're going to screw it right back on just like we took it off. Alright, so our two fuel lines, hopefully you can see where these go down here. This one goes on the nipple closest to the bulb. This is our return line. So we're going to cut that one off. And see if we can work it up on where it goes. Might have been easier to do before we put the carburetor on. Yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna pull the carburetor back off. I tell you what, let's do. Let's cut both lines to length first. So we'll get them about where we want them. And then we're gonna take the carburetor off to hook them up. The air filter housing is in the way. Yeah, so the small line is going to go right here in this fitting, and the large line is going to go on this fitting. Alright, now let's put this back on. Alright, so I think that has us in pretty good shape. We're ready to put some fuel in this. We'll test the primer, make sure that it pulls fuel up through the tank like it should, and then we'll see if we can get it to run. I did check the adjustment screws on these small carburetors like this. Are right here, there's two of them. The one closest to the engine is the low speed, so that'll be the idle mixture, and the one furthest away will be the high speed mixture. And for some reason, they don't put just a regular slotted screw on there. They have several different shapes, several different configurations of the head of the screw. This one is called splined. And so I have a screwdriver here, a special tool called splined, and it has the right end to fit these adjustment screws. And so you can get these tools, they come in a set. There's about 8 different shapes, and you can get the whole set for, I don't know, $10 or $15 maybe. And it'll have all the different shapes that you need to adjust these carburetors. Like I said, this one This one is shaped and I have the right tool, so when we start it up we may have to adjust a little bit, but we'll see what we need to do after we get it running. So I'm going to reposition a little bit. I'm going to put a little fuel in it and we'll see if we can get this one to run. Alright, so with some fuel in the tank and the carburetor back on, we're going to push the primer bulb and hopefully we're going to see fuel come up through this line, up into the carburetor, and then come back through the smaller line. So let's cross our fingers. Here we go. Oh yeah, there's fuel coming in right away. And there it is going back down. Alright, so we're ready to do a test start. I'm going to rearrange the camera and then we'll see if we can get this thing to start up. Okay, so fuel in the tank, the carburetor back on. We're going to see if we can get this one to start up. We're going to go to full choke. The kill switch is momentary, so it's on all the time. And we're going to pull it through a few times, see what happens. I have my screwdriver here to adjust the idle speed and the spline tool to adjust the mixture if we need to, but let's see what happens. Well, that's a good sign. So we'll go to half choke. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Carburetor needed just a little bit of adjustment. The idle mixture was too rich, so I leaned that out a little bit and then played with the top end until it, hopefully you could hear it start running smooth after I adjusted the carburetor a little bit. So yeah, that's it. I think this one's good, ready to go back to work. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe and check my playlist. There's other videos out there about small engine repair, and I hope this encourages you to get out there and work on your own. They're not that difficult to fix. So yeah, it's worth a try, I think. And thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.